Thank you so much for the invitation to be here this evening. Fadi asked me if I would share a little bit about our journey, the first trip, and I see several members that were on that journey with us, and it's great to see you again. And we had another trip this summer, and also to share a little bit about the opportunity I was given to visit with Fethullah Gulen in June. And so that's what I'm going to do. But before I do that, I am from Peterborough, and Fadi did raise the issue that we experienced. I'd just like to make a couple comments on that. First of all, you know, during the election, we had a young lady, Maryam Monsef, who is a refugee from Afghanistan, who ran for office and was successful. It was an extraordinary young lady, extraordinary to see in our community. And we were so proud that she was elected, given her story and the story of her mom, who along with Miriam and two sisters, you know, came to Canada and was supported and raised in our community. Sadly, the events took place, which was in fact that the mosque in Peterborough was attacked. You know, and you know, it was interesting that the night before that event, my wife and I, we were watching Peter Mansbridge interview Maryam Monsef and tell the story, and I was so proud, you know, of our community that evening, listening to her story being presented nationally and listening to her say that she ran because she wanted to give back to our community because of how supportive it was. And then the very next day, I was embarrassed and saddened, because just as in every community, there are some that do things that are just simply wrong. And it happened in our community. And for several days, many of us felt very sad about that. But then the community responded. The community responded in a couple of ways that I think were important. One was to raise the money to be able to restore the mosque. But the other as important, and perhaps even more important, were that the fellow churches opened their doors. The United Church, the Jewish community, and others, so that those from the mosque could come. Those people could come and continue their prayers in a place of welcome. And again, I felt proud about our community. That's Peterborough, but it's also in a sense an analogy for our country. That we have, you know, some sad moments, but we also have moments where we can be proud of our responding. Back in 2010, I was at home with my wife. I retired and lived in Peterborough, and I got this phone call and asking me to be a speaker at the dinner, the IDI dinner here in Toronto. I couldn't believe that they were asking a white guy from a WASP community to come and talk about diversity in Toronto. What happened was quite interesting, that I was sent the works of Fethullah Gulen to read. And I was sent the information about the IDI and its purpose and goals. And I read that and I reflected on it, and I tried to share some things on that evening. And I mustn't have done too badly, because a few months later, we got a call saying, would you like to go to Turkey? I kind of felt I was the only one in town until Fadi said 200 of you have gone. You know, like, I guess I don't feel so unique, but it was an amazing thing. But I got to tell you that we were skeptical that first year. We had a full agenda, and we couldn't go that first year in 2011, but we were skeptical. We weren't sure, what is this movement? And we needed to think about that and reflect on that and read more about it. And then in 2012, we agreed that we would go. And we were fortunate enough to have Fati as our guide, as we were this year with Fati and Aisha. And we thank them so much for their guidance. And guidance not just in terms of the trip and taking care of the logistics, but guidance in terms of their gentleness with us as we learned about you know, this place. Ellen and I decided, I think, to go because we were interested in Turkey, learning about Turkey, historically about Turkey. Secondly, we went because we had never really had the time to spend in a Muslim country where we could learn from the people who lived in that country. And IDI provided that opportunity for us to visit with those families and to be able to talk with them and dialogue with them and learn from the people on the ground, rather than through the kind of commercial things that, we had been on a cruise and gone to, to places, but that was the commercial side. This was the opportunity. And so we went and we found a country that many of you have, and I'm sure that some of the observations I'm going to make in 2012 was really quite interesting. Turkey was a country that really quite surprised us. It surprised us because of how modern it was, clean and neat, and the infrastructure was really quite striking. The airports, the train stations, the buses, the roads, all were quite modern. Yes, there was history, but older buildings and that, but the cleanliness of the country, the friendliness of the people, the openness were really quite amazing to us, and we were really struck by that. Obviously, also, we were struck by the families that hosted us and welcomed us. Even though we were not of the same religious beliefs or cultural backgrounds, there was that openness of the families and their willingness to talk with us. We found a country that was economically in a very good place. It had really, over the previous few decades, the economic prosperity had come to Turkey, and it was a country that had hope. And even in its government, at that time, they were really quite hopeful about what the future was ahead for them. There was a real openness as we visited the media places, as you probably did, and we read the Zaman newspaper, and thank goodness we had every day, Fadi would give us the paper and we could learn about what was going on. And there seemed to be open speech and open dialogue and opportunity. At the same time, we also saw that there were storm clouds, about. It wasn't all pretty. They had a president who had an aspiration to get a supermajority and to be able to change the Constitution so that he could have other powers. It wasn't all rosy either, because in fact Fethullah Gulen had been charged, and there were the court cases, but at that time in 2012 it had been settled, and it seemed to be a little bit behind the circumstances. And so it was such a beautiful country. We had a chance to visit, and a beautiful place, and a place where we learned about, the roots of the Muslim religion, and we're given books and things so we could read and continue our education after our trip. And that trip was a trip that we did with people that we had never met before, but we kind of came together and we explored and exchanged ideas, and it was really quite an education and really quite transformative, I believe. And so from 2012, we've been following Turkey. We've been watching what's been going on. We've been thinking about it. And we've been talking about it, and we've attended a few of the events, and I've certainly continued the dialogue between IDI and Alan and I. But we did come back to, in this summer, well, we went to the event that they just announced, Fadi just announced, and I was invited to form a new group. And we invited friends of ours, people that were colleagues, community leaders, people that we knew and had relationships for a long time. And so that was a little bit different, and we were asked to kind of go along and work. And it was a wonderful opportunity for us to continue to share with people, that were friends of ours. So that was one of the fundamental differences from the first trip to the second trip, was a brand new group of people to meet, and then this last trip was one where we shared it with friends and colleagues. This last trip also, we had a chance to not only visit Turkey, but we had a chance to visit Azerbaijan. And that was a wonderful 2 days that we spent there. extraordinary country, a former Soviet country. Again, a country that we did not know anything about, but the group said, well, if Fadi and Aisha think it's a great place to go, we're going to go. None of us even knew where it was. I can honestly tell you, even when we got on the plane to go there, I don't think we knew geographically where it was. But when we landed in this spectacular glass airport, it was like, we had gone, how you see in Canada, we have these ice castle hotels. It was like landing in an ice castle airport. It was all this glass at night, and it was spectacular. And we drove. They had just finished having the European Games in Azerbaijan, and so they had just the road from the airport into town was made up of renovated Russian buildings they had just refurbished, and these spectacular new buildings, new museums and new stadiums and new concert halls and sculpture. And we thought, my God, this is Russia? This is a former Russian Soviet state. It just blew us away, and we had a wonderful time visiting with family there and the university and others. But there was a storm cloud there too, in that the oil prices. It was predominantly an oil-rich country that was had prospered based upon the $120 a barrel, and of course, we now know that it's at $41 a barrel, and they're having to face up to that economic. By the way, everywhere we went, everybody wanted to offer Fadi a job. It was like, I felt like I was on the Fadi tour. He is so admired, and they wish him to come back. He had taught there and introduced us to the university. So we went to Azerbaijan almost immediately and then came back to Turkey. And so what did we find when we were in Turkey? Well, what we found was that, that things had really fundamentally changed. We found that a country that previously seemed to have hope was a country that really was questioning its democratic structures. A country that previously was prosperous was now having the numbers I'm not sure about, but we were told almost 3 million refugees had come into Turkey from Syria. We did not see street people. I want you to know, we never saw them in 2012, nor did we see them, but we kept hearing about the challenges, that Turkey was having, particularly with these people. And I'd just like to talk about the Syrian refugees for a moment, because we're seeing the effects of that. The majority of those Syrians are Kurds that are coming in as refugees. And we know the history of the Kurds. So the Kurdish people have homeland after the Second World War was divided up, and there was no place for them. And the sense I had, despite the openness of the people, all of the people we met with from the Hizmet movement were very, very strong. But reading the newspapers and reading other things, one clearly got the feeling that the Kurds were not as welcome in Turkey. And so it's not a surprise when you see the majority of people coming into Turkey who want to get out of Turkey, that become the boat people, because they, I sense, do not feel there's a sense of belonging in Turkey for them. And so Turkey is an escape route rather than a destination for them, for these people. And that was, we sensed that, and we heard about that, and you felt that in the conversations. One of the most important things that happened, we were between 2012 and 2015. Of course, we followed the election, and we were delighted to see that the government did not get the majority, got a minority government. And the reality of that was that this people had spoken out and refused the president what he wished. And we were optimistic based upon that, and as we followed it. As you know, the government did then, was supposed to create a minority government and through a coalition. And it became very clear that their intention was not to have a coalition, but in fact to call a quick election. And that election was taking place when we arrived in this summer. And you could see that the freedom of speech had been negated. And this was a significant difference, I think, between 2012 and 2015. And how was it negated? Well, you know, the Erdogan government had passed legislation saying that you could not be critical of the leadership in the country. That bill was utilized in order to dismiss judges from across the nation, to dismiss police chiefs. We heard 1,000 police chiefs. Now, I don't know the numbers, because sometimes the numbers are, you know, here and there, but that's what we were told. 1,000 police chiefs who wanted to enforce the law were dismissed across the country. We know that media people were arrested and jailed and prosecuted and then released. We knew and we felt and experienced fear. We felt intimidation. We felt that, in fact, the freedom of speech during an election was minimized. We also felt that the people that were hosting us were extraordinarily courageous. The people hosting us were people who knew that their movement was under duress. This was not something we had experienced before, even though Fethullah Gulen himself had been charged previously. You did not feel that the movement in 2012 was under the same duress. You felt optimistic about it. You felt it was moving forward, and it was, that the effects of this building the schools, in the country were having a positive effect. What we felt this summer when we went was, in fact, the freedom of speech was compromised. We felt that the people who were hosting us could in fact be, there could be retribution towards them. You felt that the people, we went to the Zaman Newspaper Media Center, and which we had done previously, and felt wonderful about this world-class media center. This summer, when we went there, we met with one of the editors. It was the political editor and reporter. He happened to be the reporter who actually was the one who was writing about the government's problems and the problems within the government. And he said to us, I get threats every single day. And he held up his cell phone and he said, I've got 3 threats today. So what I'm saying, there was evidence in the people that we were talking with of this change in the nature of what was going on. The people, though, the families, were still as warm and as welcoming and as kind as we had experienced in 2012. The people were still trying to be hopeful because there was this election coming, and they were hoping that there would be, again, the people would speak. Well, we know what the election would happen, and we know that it was a majority government. It wasn't a supermajority, and so that is the good news. However, what we've seen and read since is that, in fact, the government with the majority is continuing now to go after the enterprise section of the Hizmet movement, which is where they're getting their. So the business enterprise section that you were talking about is under attack, because it is fundamentally a threat, I think, because it's funding the charitable works that are going on. So there's a pushback going on. So while all this is happening, I got a phone call from IDI, and they said, well, Brian, Mr. Gulen is willing to host and a couple of Canadians. And so I was invited to go to New Jersey and meet with him. I was able to go, and we flew down to New Jersey and spent an evening with some of the IDI equivalent leaders in the U.S. and talked about the movement and what was going on. And then the next morning, we drove about an hour into Pennsylvania, into rural Pennsylvania, the countryside, and to the compound in which Fethullah Gulen is living. As you know, he's been living there for 3 decades. And he originally went there and still is because of his health. But I don't believe it's only health. It's also because of the circumstance he finds himself in. The reality is that it was a former camp or summer camp location. It's got residences. It's a relatively humble place. It's quite solid residential. It's got buildings where people can come and visit. And we were hosted for, as you know, the movement really believes the way to your heart is through your stomach, as we experienced tonight. And that's the way they treated us. We had a wonderful lunch, and then we had an opportunity. And we saw people coming and going. His day was full of coming and going. And we went to the room in which, the building in which he lives. He lives in a single room. Very, humble location and humble abode. Outside of his room is a large meeting room in which we met with him. Going in, we were told we had an hour, and we were told that he's often quite quiet, and we needed to, kind of draw him out. I said that wasn't a problem. Being an extrovert, I could do fairly well with that. We were brought to the area, and I happened to be the first one to go into the room. The others were coming behind. I don't know what happened to them, to be honest. And I walked into the room, and this little fellow, he's quite short, came up to me. He was about my age, so we felt comfortable. And he came up and he welcomed me. And he took me by the hand over to his seat and asked me to sit in his seat. And I said, I'm sorry, that's your seat. And he said, no, I want you to sit in my seat. So, I'm getting chills even remembering it. The gesture of him giving me his seat, I think, was very symbolic and important to him, and it certainly was to me. I was moved by it. He sat to my right hand, and the other Canadian fellow from Saskatchewan, who used to be the Attorney General there, was with us, and we had our own members. And in the room, there were 5 people on the one wall, and they were like moms in training, or disciples in a sense, almost felt like. They did not speak through the whole hour. And there was another gentleman who knelt at Fethullah Gulen's feet, who was his translator. You could tell he understood everything in English that we spoke, but he chose to speak in his own tongue. He also, and the translator, he would consult with the translator. We later learned that the translator was actually a professor at, I think, the University of Denver, a scholar unto himself. What was amazing, and each question we gave, and we had, the night before, we had prepared our questions because we wanted to use the time effectively. And I was asked to start, and I started off and I thanked him for the opportunity, and I thanked him for being the beacon of hope, and all of which he totally rejected. He did not want to accept for a moment that he was any of those things. He was so humble about this and about the opportunity. It was extraordinary. The man is physically, he's like us. He's a human being, but his eyes were quite deep. And when he answered a question, that we asked, he took you on a journey. It was a journey. It was clearly a journey, and it was a journey back into history, because he would go back to the roots of his own beliefs and his own training. He would take you forward into how he saw the world possibly unfolding. He took you up in terms of like really high level perception of the world, and he took you down to the micro level. It was like, and so you went on this journey to each of his answers. And you found yourself kind of floating along. At one point, I closed my eyes listening to him, and it was so congruent with his writings. And I'm sure all of you have read his writings. It was like he was speaking in the same kind of way as he's written. So, in congruency, as a psychologist, I love congruence. I think that's, that shows you who is real. And he was absolutely real. But he also gave you such perspective, like each of the answers. He, my colleague from Canada was a legal person and presented some perspectives on Canada and the world that were relatively pessimistic. You know, that we weren't the free nation that we should be, you know, and that there was how we had treated the Aboriginal peoples was certainly something that we should not be proud of. And of course, you know, the way they had treated him, Fethullah Gulen, in Turkey was inappropriate. And he dismissed it. He actually said, you know, the reality is that Muhammad, or God, has given us these tests. These are our tests. And these tests we have to live with. And it's up to us how we deal with those tests. So he was optimistic. His answers to pessimistic questions were optimistic. When he was asked about Erdogan, it was, you know, the world is full of all kinds of people. The world has people that are placed here to test us and that we have to cope with. But he expressed a tremendous belief in the people of Turkey and the people of the world. He truly, and I asked him about education, his answers I thought were quite brilliant. First of all, he is truly a teacher at heart. He's a theologian, he's a philosopher, he's an historian, but he's a teacher. And that's why the answers were from all these different perspectives. And when I asked him about education, he said that he really believed that our greatest purpose in life as parents and as well as citizens is in fact to educate. It is in fact, you know, and I asked him specifically about our school system, and he said it isn't about, you know, literacy and numeracy. It's about helping that child reach their potential. It's about helping the whole person. And education starts in the family and in the community, not just in the school. And that it was really about character education, not content education. And he really, that's what he hoped that his schools would do. And he talked about, and this is where you're presenting a business kind of development model. Three elements. The element that he talked with us about was the people development element. And that he really believed that the schools, one of the reasons why he really inspired people to build the schools is he felt that that's the place where we're going to build the golden age he talks about. It's the place where leadership is going to be developed. And if we can help people develop the right kind of character, the right kind of fully developed personalities and people, then our world would be a better place. And that's what he saw as the purpose of education, and that he hoped that would happen. And he believed that if that was happening in Turkey, he believed that in the future, yes, we may have the challenges of the immediate moment, but he believed in the end that the schools and education would, in fact, lead to greater citizenship and greater leadership, and therefore a better civilization, a better community. And that's what we took away. We left him, you know, and it was one of those things where you just wanted to just sit and just be there and stay there. I didn't really want to leave, but our time was up, and we thanked him, and again, quite humbly, he thanked us and for our commitment. We went from there to a school in New Jersey, a brand new school, brand new university. It was just created by one of his people who must have been one of those disciples, because we met with the leader, and the school was in its first year. And that school in New Jersey was created as a theology school, and it's to educate the imams of the future. And it was quite interesting. They were quite interested in our perspective on post-secondary education. But Fethullah Gulen had inspired this person to create this school, which was going to be able to create an opportunity for the imams for the United States and for the world to be there in New Jersey. What struck me as I was driving away was, you know, the saying that some people's freedom fighter is another person's terrorist. You've heard that phrase? I just couldn't imagine anybody seeing him as a terrorist. How could this person who I saw so humbly, this person who I saw, you know, so wise, who had inspired people, you know, to build 1,000 or 2,000 schools, who had inspired, you know, the emergency response to, you know, to people in the greatest need. How could this person be a terrorist? How could anybody even imagine that? It just seemed so incongruent to me. And you know, the other part of it is, how can this person sitting in a little compound in rural Pennsylvania inspire people all over the world? And yet he does, because his message is one of hope, of love, of belief that we can make a difference. And so that's what I took away from meeting with him and from our 2 trips. Thank you very much.